In this second video, I'm going to talk about cryptocurrencies, but let me qualify that, is that I'm not going to talk about cryptocurrencies from a fintech type of perspective. I referred to fintech in the video on financialization in order to demonstrate that there is a bubble that's occurring in fintech as a consequence of widespread investment. Although it's a small bubble, it's fair to say, and the majority of the investment is in transaction systems as opposed to cryptocurrencies itself. You will, I'm fairly confident, cover fintech in greater depth as you go through your university degree. So I'm doing this, talking about cryptocurrencies from a particular perspective, the perspective of materiality, tangible stroke intangible, and it allows me therefore to talk about a related and secondary concept, which I think is really the core of this particular video, and that's the concept of nothing, which I quite like because it appeals to my sense of the perverse, I think, more than anything else, in that there is an argument to suggest that globalization or widespread trading of something over an international stroke global perspective is better achieved if whatever it is that you're trying to trade constitutes nothing. Now, nothing doesn't mean an absence of something. It's a particular conceptualization that's been developed by George Ritzer, and I'll explain the ideas behind nothing when we get there. So one of the fundamental questions about cryptocurrencies is whether or not it constitutes money. Is it money? Well, I think perhaps in order to think about that is that we look at a particular case of money, Bitcoin, because that's the most famous, largest cryptocurrency by some distance. So we'll look at that one just by way of introduction, and then we'll consider moving on as to whether or not it's money by addressing the functions of money. So Bitcoin is described by Satoshi in 2008 as a peer-to-peer electronic cash payment system. It's fair to say that nobody's quite sure who Satoshi is. There have been some rumors about who he is and who he isn't, and so on and so forth. It could even be a conglomerate of people or a bringing together of a group of people that actually instigated it. But the point of it is that Bitcoin was originally pioneered as being an electronic cash payment system. And in some respects, that's no different to you using your smartphone as a platform in order to be able to pay for something. Yeah. Probably the biggest difference of a cryptocurrency is that it's decentralized, is that transactions that occur in sovereign currencies are clearly centralized by government, and they are centralized by the central banks. So one of the appeals of cryptocurrencies is that it does away with that centralizing aspect of it. They're decentralized in some respects. So they are administered by an emerging group or by the group as well. Although I find that slightly disingenuous, because the Bitcoin is clearly administered by whoever originated the first Bitcoins, because they set the parameters in place. So decentralized, yes, but not completely free, I would argue, of the original parameters that established it. And the idea being is that Bitcoins solve a problem about double counting. So double counts limited entries in the database. No one can change without fulfilling specific conditions. So therefore, there's trust that's involved in it. In other words, no two people can hold the same Bitcoin at the same time, because everything is organized in a online, virtual, and completely transparent ledger, which is usually blockchain, so people can see where the various coins are. Okay, so this creates one of the problems, I think, for cryptocurrencies as well, is that, as we well know, is that our economy is based on credit, which does mean that, to all intents and purposes, that there is double holding of the same amount of money, of the same money. Yeah, but credit creates new money. In a cryptocurrency environment, it is limited to a transactional basis. It doesn't, in theory, provide for credit, but it establishes right at the very core of it this element of trust. And you could argue that it is much more transparent than normal currencies, because of the fact that those who hold it can see where the currencies are and whoever else is holding them and how they're being traded and being transacted. So is it money? Well, there are 5 main functions of money. Medium of exchange, you can use it to exchange goods, pay your tax liabilities. A measure of value, a store of value, a unit of account. The value of something needs to be denominated in a currency. And you can use it as full and final settlement of a debt or a bill or anything else that occurs over a period of time. And so as a consequence of that, it's money. There's no difference between it and sovereign currencies. And as it's based upon trust, it therefore fulfills our criteria of money as a social relation, which is an abstract. Money's in the abstract, not necessarily as a commodity, regardless of the fact that economists would like to call it, refer to it as a special kind of a commodity. It's an abstraction. It's a social relationship based upon trust, and cryptocurrencies completely fulfill all of those requirements. The difference, the principal difference, as I explained earlier on, is that how does credit enter the system? So now we've got our cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, established over there as money and as an abstraction. But now I want to introduce you to George Ritzer's concept of nothing. Now, Ritzer argues that globalization is much more effective when the products that are being globalized comprise nothing. Now, these are non-places that comprises of non-things. There's non-service behind it, and non-people, or a non-person is involved in it as well. So let's think about what these might be. A non-place is that it's not tied to a specific place or geography, is that the product can exist outside of time and space. Yeah. Or if it is in a time and a space, it can be replicated exactly the same somewhere else. Okay. And because of that, there's nothing special about the thing itself. It's a non-thing. Okay. It's not specific to culture and geography. And it transcends all of that because it's ubiquitous non-thing. Okay. And there's a non-service that sits behind it. There's no kind of like service that's comprised part of it. It just does, the product does what it does, and that's it. There's no kind of like added flash service that goes into it. And it doesn't require people to be engaged in it either. And if it fulfills all of these criteria, then it's a nothing. It's a non-thing. There's nothing. And therefore it can be globalized very, very quickly. Now, because predominantly what we're doing is that we are talking about a space of flows, and what exactly comprises those space of flows, the space of flows is zeros and ones. It's nothing. It's therefore a non-thing. Now, that doesn't mean to say that nothing is an absence of something. It just means it's a particular classification that's been determined by Ritzer. And you think about other things that are very easily globalized, and they are nothing. That's credit cards as an example. Doesn't require a place in order to be able to exist. It doesn't require something that sits behind it. It's just a credit card that is the same wherever the credit card is in time, space, and place. There's no particular service that acts as it, that's important behind it. There's no particular added value that's added onto it, and the service itself, wherever it is instantly replicable. There's nothing new that's added to it, and there are no people that are involved. So it's a non-person type thing. So that's a credit card. Credit cards are ubiquitous, travel all over the globe because they're nothing. And I would argue that cryptocurrencies are exactly the same. They're nothing. Not an absence of something, but they comprise of non-places, so they don't exist in a place. They comprise of a non-thing because they're zeros and ones up in the cyberverse. There's no particular service that's involved in it. They either are or there aren't. And people, non-people, are involved. Now, you could have an argument, I suppose, about some of these if you really wanted to, but I think that's a really good way of thinking about nothing. And cryptocurrencies, not an absence of something, but they are nothing. And as a consequence of that is that they're very easily globalized. In other words, they're very easily traded. They're amenable for easy trades. They're not necessarily easily transacted upon, i.e. used for transactions. And the reason that they're not particularly useful for transactions is because of volatility. Is that the price of a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency, or cryptocurrencies more generally, are incredibly volatile. Now, looking at market or market index volatility against cryptocurrency volatility is something that I haven't done because it's just struck me as being something that might be very interesting to look at, to see which one follows the other one, and look at levels of causality, market indexes against cryptocurrency indexes, and to see whether or not there is any correlation between the two and which one might be driving the other one. Does market index drive volatility in cryptocurrencies, or does volatility in the price of cryptocurrencies drive volatility in market indexes? But it's nothing. And this is an outline of how it works. Okay, so someone requests a transaction. The transaction is requested and it's broadcasted via a person-to-person network consisting of many, many computers. And that's one of the things, the limitations to Bitcoin, is that in order to be able to mine Bitcoins, you really do need uber processing power. But if you have them, then to transact them is not that, doesn't require that much. So in order for the transaction to go through, is that a validation process needs to occur. In other words, people that are in the network, the nodes in the network, communicate with each other in order to ascertain the validity of the transaction. Now that could take a while. It takes about 5 days, I think. Well, it used to, it's probably an awful lot quicker now, but you can well imagine that because of the underlying volatility of the Bitcoin itself, is that the price, or the value of the Bitcoin could have changed quite substantially before initiating the transaction, which is less of a problem if all you want to do is to stay in the Bitcoin environment. But if you want to transfer your Bitcoins into the currency of the realm, then that is a problem. Now, this is less of a problem if governments will accept cryptocurrencies, Bitcoins, as payment of your tax liabilities, because then it doesn't matter whether or not it does. But it does matter if your tax liability is expressed in dollars, and that was, or the currency, the official currency, the sovereign currency. And that was a problem, in that both Japan and Singapore accepted cryptocurrencies in payment of tax, but because of the viability, the volatility is that they've stopped doing that now. So once verified, the transaction can take place. And then it's done through blockchains and the creations of blocks within the ledger, so that it's instantly accessible and it's instantly available. Cryptocurrencies, it says on here, is a medium of exchange created and stored electronically in the blockchain using encryption techniques to control the creation of monetary units and to verify the transfer of funds. Bitcoin's the best known example. It holds no intrinsic value in that it's not redeemable for another commodity such as gold. Hold your horses, I'll come back to that one in a minute. Has no physical form and exists only in the network. Its supply is not determined by a central bank, and the network is completely decentralized. So on that basis, there's a non-service, non-people, non-place, and nothing, non-thing. It's nothing. It's not an absence of something, it's just nothing. Now, if we look at some of those criteria again, it says that its supply is not determined by a central bank. Well, it's not determined by a central bank, but it is determined by Satoshi, because there are only 21 million Bitcoins that will be issued. Now, that doesn't stop people breaking them down into various millibits and bits of bits and so on and so forth. And there has been a bifurcation as well in the Bitcoin architecture, but the supply is limited. So therefore, it has been determined by a central bank, but it's the central bank of Bitcoin. And it has no intrinsic value. Well, we should never be too surprised at the innovation of the next amount of, or the next generation of bricoleurs, because you can trade your Bitcoins for gold in a different index and through a different market. And so there are also cryptocurrencies which are based upon the value of gold. So if that's the case, then they are looking less and less like having no intrinsic value. But they are becoming more and more like derivatives and derivative contracts. Now we know that they are astronomical over the planet, and they are effectively $1.4 quadrillion worth of contracts between traders and investors and so on and so forth. So does that mean that this is now becoming more of a something or of still nothing? And I would argue it's still nothing. A derivative contract's a derivative contract. It just sets out what it's going to do. It's transferable all over the world. It's not based by place. It doesn't require people to provide a service on it. The service is the same wherever you are. So it's a contract, so it's a non-thing. It's non-place. It doesn't require a time and place to be located. There's no service that's in it, and the contract is the contract. People are not involved in delivering it. So derivatives in our understanding and classification of something or nothing, derivatives are a globalized nothing, which might well explain why there's $1.4 quadrillion worth of contracts around. And because of the appeal of a decentralized currency, which may be more romantic rather than anything else, and if that's the case, then I'll refer you back to Thrift's article about it being about the romance and not necessarily the finance. And fintech global fintech, as I say, is increasing for a number of different reasons. For the same reasons, I would argue that Netflix has got a market value in the same way that storage stocks exist, and the fact that a car manufacturer that don't make many cars is worth more than a car manufacturer that does make an awful lot of cars. Whilst the amount of deals are going down, as this chart shows, is that the global fintech investments are going up, and they're going up on an annual basis, but they're slowing down. And where is the investment now? Well, the investment is basically, it's in transaction costs. So most fintech valuations, except the payment related ones, have suffered since COVID-19. Is it burst of the fintech bubble, or is it time for a new narrative that's going to drive the next generation of investment and interest in it? And anybody can create a cryptocurrency. It's not difficult. If you download the Ethereum app, it will establish you an algorithm, and you can launch your cryptocurrency. The problem is, because it's based on trust and it's an abstraction, is whether anybody will accept it too and want to buy into it or mine it. The process of mining for a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency is that you solve the algorithm, and once you've solved the algorithm, you're rewarded with a Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin, then the algorithm develops a new layer of code, and then the mining process starts again. It's very computing intensive, and it's also very energy intensive, in that it is estimated that the Bitcoin architecture consumes about as much electricity as Australia, which is a lot. It's not very environmentally friendly, regardless of whatever else it might well be. An initial coin offering is offering the new or part of a new cryptocurrency. So same as an IPO for shares, you can do an ICO for cryptocurrencies. And there are many of them that are out there. Many of them don't amount to much, but there are a lot out there. And the little chart there just shows you the biggest ICOs in 2017. I haven't got any figures for 2018 yet, so it takes a while for somebody to mine all the data and bring it together. And they're sold on cryptocurrency exchanges like money.co.uk, but they're indexes, just like the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500 and so on and so forth. And I've said there is a hard fork between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, which just means that it's split out and that somebody's decided that Bitcoin has developed into Bitcoin Cash in it's a different thing. So the Bitcoins have split out, and how that plays out at a later time, I don't know. You don't need to know, that's just purely descriptive. So it's just suggesting that the Bitcoin itself, or the cryptocurrency itself as it's established, doesn't need to stay in the same way. It can split into different things and become different things. Okay. This is the value of ICOs year by year. You see in 2015 is that it was ICOs, cryptocurrency, was only $5.21 million. That's ICOs. That rose to 10-fold or 12-fold, 64 in 2016. By 2017, you got a lot of money going into Bitcoin, into cryptocurrency ICOs. That's 17,707 million, which is 17 billion. And that's dropped down to just short of 10 billion in 2018. And then in 2019, it's dropped again, considerably dropped again. So does that mean that the age of cryptocurrency is over? Not by a long way. There's quite a lot of appeal or interest in cryptocurrencies, but from centralized bodies, such as the Bank of China, is that probably the Chinese government will be the first, or the People's Bank of China, I should argue, the central bank, is that China is likely to be the first economy to produce a state-owned cryptocurrency. And many banks are looking at the capacities of, or the possibilities of, organizing their own cryptocurrencies as well. These are commercial banks. And also the Bank of England, Central Bank of the UK, is also, and I dare say the Fed will be as well. But the point is that states and the centralized bodies, which was the point of cryptocurrency, was to get beyond sort of like a centralized kind of control in order to democratize finance. That's the idea about it, is you democratize finance, which allows you for a deeper penetration of finance, because in theory, that's going to benefit everybody. But if what you've done is you've created just another group of speculative assets, then all you've done is you've just accelerated Minsky's curve. But there's interest in ICOs is disappearing, but it doesn't mean to say that cryptocurrencies themselves are disappearing. They certainly aren't. So, this is Bitcoin's price, the current price. I just downloaded this yesterday. You can see that there's a huge spike in 2018, and by 2000, halfway through to coming towards the end of 2020, aren't we now? Is that the price of Bitcoin is rivaling where it was back in early 2018. And my question is, what are people buying? What are we investing in here? And we have to go back to see whether or not anything productive is being produced, being created. Is there any value that's been created by people investing in cryptocurrencies? And the answer is no. So they look at the moment as just being an extension to somebody's portfolio of investments, of speculative investments. And because of the volatility, is that these are hugely speculative. So what's being bought? Well, people buying into the narrative, and the narrative is performing the market. I think Bitcoin is the classic example, if you like, of a Keynesian beauty parade.